Hello, friends. James's father's secret is revealed. Will James and Tu Diep accept the truth? Cold night wind through the trees, creating a murmuring sound like a whisper of the past. Dark, John stood silently, looking towards the building where James is working. His eyes were red with anger. He bet everything to get revenge on James, but at the last minute everything fell apart. James's company is in trouble, but not completely collapsed yet. What angered John the most was Tu Diep, the girl he began to have deep feelings for, always by James' side. "James, you think you can beat me?" John muttered, clenching his fist. He knew clearly that if he continued on his current path, sooner or later he will lose. He needs a new plan. A plan that could cost James everything, including Tu Diep. Tu Diep sitting on an old motorbike, run through the narrow streets of the morning market. Every time I see her, James always feels a strange emotion. She was not like the other girls he had met. She is strong and resilient, but also very gentle. James didn't drive a luxury car today as usual. He stood waiting at the head of the market, holding a bag of hot rice rolls in hand. When Tu Diep arrived, he held out the bag of cakes in front of her. "Have you had breakfast yet?" he asked with concern in his eyes. Tu Diep was a bit surprised, but then smiled and accepted it to thank him. "But why did you go to the market so early today?" James shrugged. A rare smile appeared on his lips. "I want to go for a walk and buy you some food." She bowed her head a little shyly. An indescribable feeling arose in her heart. This man, despite facing many difficulties, but still do not forget to care for her. When James reached out his hand, she reflexively took it. Warm feeling passed from his hand to hers. A brief moment, but with great power. But then in a hidden corner of the market, John was standing watching. His eyes darkened when he saw the scene before him. One afternoon, as James finished a tense meeting with shareholders, he received a call from Tu Diep's uncle. "James, I have something to tell you." Uncle Diep's voice dropped. When James arrived, the old man was sitting on the porch, distant eyes as if looking back to a sad past. "Your father is not as good as you think." James paused. "What do you mean?" Uncle Tu Diep sighed with heavy eyes. "In the past, my father took land from many people, including our family. He not only uses tricks, but also forced people to leave. When everything fell apart, he fled abroad to escape punishment. Where do you think your family's wealth comes from?" James's heart was clenched. He couldn't believe what he just heard. His father, whom he once respected, turns out to be a land grabber. But the truth is still the truth, and James knew he had to face it. Tu Diep sat quietly on the riverbank, gently stirring the water with her hands. She remembered what her uncle said. If Father James really did such terrible things, is James like his father? She looked up at the starry sky. In her heart is a war between reason and emotion. She loves James, but she also cannot ignore his family's dark past. At a fancy cafe, James sat opposite Min, a major investor in the construction sector. Min is a gentleman with a bit of mystery. When seeing the purple leaf entering the shop, Min's eyes flashed with interest. "This girl is?" Min asked with a smile. James was a little stunned, but then he replied, "Hey, my friend." Min just laughed at you. James did not reply, but his eyes unintentionally revealed his emotions. Min picked up the cup of coffee, took a sip, and looked towards Tu Diep. She is very special. James felt a little uncomfortable. I don't like the way Min looks at Tu Diep, but he did not show it on the outside. Since the meeting, Min started to proactively approach Tu Diep more. One time when James and Tu Diep were walking together, Min suddenly appeared. "Hello to people." Min smiled lightly. "Yesterday, I bought a very good book. If you like, I can give it to you." Tu Diep happily accepted, but James was not comfortable. He stared at Min as if to warn him of something. Min just curled his lips as if he was intentionally teasing James. James clenched his hands. He didn't like the feeling at all. One day, James and Tu Diep went to an old library together to search for documents related to past land disputes. What they found left them both speechless. Father James' name appears in many records relating to appropriation, land. There are letters denouncing the victims' statements. James felt like the world was falling apart. Tu Diep looked at him with eyes full of pain. "James," she whispered. He turned to her with immense pain in his eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore, Tu Diep." She held his hand tightly. "You are not my father, James. You can change everything." James looked at her for a long time, and finally he nodded. After finding out the truth about his father, James felt like there was a heavy stone in his heart. He drove away unconsciously, mind clouded by conflicting thoughts. What Tu Diep's uncle said was not wrong. His father was actually a land grabber, even with clear evidence. Tu Diep sat in the passenger seat, looking at James worriedly. She can feel his pain. "James, what are you going to do?" she asked softly. James did not answer immediately for a long time before he whispered, "I must find my father. I need to know why he did that." James began searching for information about his father. He left the country many years ago, and no one knows where he is. However, thanks to some connections, business relations, he found a clue that my father might be on a small island in Thailand. "Tu Diep, do you want to go with me?" James asked while packing. She looked at him with determined eyes. "Of course. I can't leave you to face this alone." The trip begins. When arriving at the small island, James and Tu Diep asked, "Long time to find a simple wooden house near the sea." The man who lived there looked haggard, but the eyes are still sharp. James took a deep breath and stepped inside father. The man turned back stunned. He put the cup of tea on the table, looked at his son for a long time, and then sighed. "Finally I came and sat down across from him. I know everything." "Why did Dad do that?" The man was silent for a long time, then began to tell the story of the past. Turns out when young, he was once an ambitious businessman, but in one investment mistake, he borrowed a huge amount of money to save career and family. He had to use every trick to win fertile lands. He knew it was wrong, but he had no choice. "Any other, if you don't do that, maybe I could not have the life I have today." He looked at James with pained eyes. James clenched his fist. "I don't know how to feel." After the conversation with his father, James was almost silent. He sat by the sea watching the waves crash on the shore. Tu Diep came to him and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" James sighed. "I don't know." He felt both angry and sorry for his father. Tu Diep smiled gently. "He is still your father. What matters is which path you choose next." James turned to look at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Tu Diep." After returning, James decided to do what he had never done before. "I never thought of it. Compensation for families whose land was taken by your father." He held a press conference, public sorry, and pledged to use part of the assets to remedy the consequences. The whole city was shaken. A powerful CEO, willing to admit his family's mistakes and take responsibility. But not all AI accepts it. John took this opportunity to continue to put pressure on James. He agitated the families of the deceased, land that made them protest against James. Min is a man with a handsome appearance but full of ambition, also not sitting still. He had feelings for Tu Diep and wanted to use this opportunity to pull her away from James. One day Min came to Tu Diep. "Tu Diep, do you think James can really change? Are you sure he is not like his father?" Min asked with a probing look. Tu Diep looked straight at Min with a determined voice. "James is not his father, and I believe him." Min slightly curled his lips. "So what but if one day," she discovered, "James used the same tricks as his father? Do you still believe him?" Tu Diep was a bit stunned, but then she smiled. "He may make mistakes, but he always knows how to fix them. That's what matters." Min looked at her for a long time, then smiled lightly. "See, I lost." But in his mind another plan was forming. James the last gradually overcame the consequences that his father left behind. He won back the trust of many people, but also at the cost of many things. Tu Diep is still by his side, never leaving his side. One day when the two were walking along the riverbank, James suddenly grabbed her hand. "Tu Diep, do you regret choosing to be with me?" She looked at him with eyes full of love. Never why James squeezed her hand. "Thank you, MM." Wind blows. Carry the memories of the rushing water. The past may be full of mistakes, but the future still awaits them ahead. Please leave a comment